The following program is a West Tennessee PBS special presentation made possible through the generous financial support of viewers like you. Please visit westtnpbs.org and make a donation today so that we can continue to make local programs like this possible. Thank you.
You know, as we started out with inducting new members, Justin and Carl, I was just thinking I was just inducted last week, so I'm a brand new member myself, but it makes me think about several visits that I had to the Rotary for a number of weeks, and I kept telling Jody, and I would come as Jody's guest, and I said, Jody, I really need to kind of meet people if I'm going to try to join the Rotary. Or at least that was my perception anyway, that I needed to do that. What I didn't realize is that Jody was paying for all my meals every time. But once I found out, I thought it was actually pretty funny. So I just kept coming. I said, Jody, is it okay if I come today? You know? And then he goes, look, I've carried you long enough. So anyway, but then I'll tell you, I tried to pay him and he wouldn't take my money. So that's just the kind of guy he is. But Mr. Kirkland, Carl, this will be a bit emotional for me. My wife died a year ago, and she was at the cancer center. And I just wanted to thank you for that. That was something else to have that in Jackson. Because she would never have made it to Vanderbilt or Memphis to do that. But excuse my breaking down a bit, but very thankful for that. And I wanted to thank you and your family and Alice for doing that. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, so we've got a lot of things we could talk about. I put together a little bit of a presentation for what I do right now, which is run the Drug Task Force, and I thought that I could kind of let you know how we came about. Jody talked about it a little bit, but how we go about doing our job every day and to try to protect the community of Jackson and also of Henderson County and Chester County, because we're a 3-county operation. We're a judicial district. So, but what we do is we have approximately 15 to 20 members. It fluctuates a little bit. But our task force is made up of officers and deputies from the police departments and sheriff's departments that make up the 26th judicial district. So we have officers from Lexington, from Henderson and Chester County, Jackson and Madison County. And so we're put together for the sole purpose of fighting the drug problem in these 3 counties. So that's what we do every day, weekends, nights, whatever it takes. That's where we are. But it seems to be working very well. We've been going about roughly a year we've been on the street. We had some training we had to do when we first started to get everything up and running. But I'm enjoying running that unit. The chiefs and the sheriffs, actually, believe it or not, they let me handpick the unit, which was unbelievable. And I'm very proud of what we're doing. We're having an impact in some areas already. I can't give you the exact numbers. I looked at them a couple weeks ago, but overdose deaths are down, and that's the one I look at. Are we having an impact? And we are. I think we had reduced the number of overdose deaths by about 25 for that same period of time for the year prior to us being active. So that's one thing that I look at and have pride about, is that we've reduced those numbers. But I'll kind of run through here, and then I'll talk about some stuff with the Secret Service and U.S. Marshals as well, and I'll handle any questions that you might have as well. What does the Drug Task Force do in our community? Well, we enforce state and federal drug laws. Now, we're out there enforcing state drug laws, but the way the law works is a lot of times when we're enforcing those state laws, that's also a federal law violation as well. And if it's a big enough fish, it may sometimes end up in federal court. That was the way it used to be in the past. But Tennessee has really improved its laws on prosecuting drug offenders and gun offenders. And so a lot of times now our cases, they stay at the state level because we can get just as much jail time or punishment for them as we would in the federal courts. So that's something that's been a real positive change since when I worked here back in the 90s. We enforce firearm statutes. We assist other agencies with drugs and violent crime. We've had a couple of cases here recently where we had some folks that were, and I won't speak to the cases too specifically, but they were some robberies that were happening in both Chester County and in Henderson County. And that information was conveyed to the task force, and we have we're an undercover unit, and we were able to set up and capture all 5 of those suspects that had been doing those robberies. So that's another way that we're making the community better. And then, of course, here today, we doing what I'm doing, we educate the community. Now, how do we start our cases? Well, we get Crime Stoppers tips. There's people that call in that don't call Crime Stoppers. They just call our office. Confidential sources, sometimes people just come to us. Officers and deputies on the street that may pull somebody over and they develop a lead there. Sometimes it's from our own activity. Actually, a lot of time it is. We're out there working the roads just like everybody else. You just may not know who we are when we're doing it sometimes. We respond to some overdose calls if there looks like there's any kind of leads there that we might be able to work with and work backwards to figure out where that drug came from, to see if there's a prosecution that's possible there. But in all cases, we make sure that we have credible information. We just don't let somebody call in or give a tip and we just run on it like wildfire. We have to make sure it's credible. There's a thing out there that's going on now, they call it swatting. You've probably heard of that, where they'll kind of call and say there's something going on at your house, and then the police respond, and it's a total fictitious call. So we have to watch out for stuff like that, that we're not going out and trying to start investigations on folks that have not violated any laws or anything like that. So we have to look out for things like that. Drugs we see the most in this area. We see illicit fentanyl, and I say illicit because there is such thing as licit fentanyl as well. That's the opioid that's killing a lot of folks. And I'll talk here a little bit in a minute about how that happens. We see cocaine, obviously, and methamphetamine or ice. We see diverted prescription drugs like fentanyl, oxycodone, ketamine, and gabapentin. That's what we're seeing right now. Illicit fentanyl, that's the #1 problem in the United States right now. I'm sure everybody's heard that in the news. Where does it come from? It comes from China. There are some manufacturers, I think in the United States or in Europe, but that's for the or the prescribed fentanyl. That is not for the illicit fentanyl. All the illicit fentanyl that I'm aware of comes from China. The chemicals are sent to Mexico where the drug cartel mixes them together, and then they send the product on to the United States. Sometimes they cut it in with cocaine or they cut it in with methamphetamine. When I say cut, I mean they just mix it in. Fentanyl is cheaper than cocaine and methamphetamine, and so sometimes they're just making more money when they do that. It is a synthetic drug. It does not, there's no plant for it or anything like that. It's totally made in a lab. And usually it's in powder or pill form. There's a few pictures, I don't know if you can see them that well. Powder on the left, it looks a lot like cocaine or meth. It's kind of a white or an off-white color. A lot of what we're seeing on the streets right now are the fentanyl pills. And they're like the picture that you see there in the middle, the blue tablets. A lot of times they can be confused for oxycodone, but they might just be completely fentanyl. When they're mixing this, and I said I would touch on this a few moments ago, when the folks that are mixing this together, the cartel members in Mexico, when they're doing this, they don't know exactly what the strength is when they're mixing this stuff together. And it's not like it's in a precise laboratory where they know exactly what goes into the pill. These folks don't know what they're putting in there. And that's why you might get one pill that's good and the next one will kill you because there's too much in it. But we see a lot of this on the street now, and we're seizing hundreds at a time sometimes. And it's in all 3 of our counties. Sometimes you'll see them in multicolors, but it's basically the same things as the blue pills there that you're looking at. Cocaine, I obviously see that. There's some street names for coke, blow, bump, sniff, or snow. There's a bunch of other names for it as well. There's crack on the right, and I know you're thinking, he put crack up there. I thought crack was gone too in the 90s, but it's not. It's back. We've been making some crack cases here the last couple of months. Can't quite explain that, except maybe some folks that did a lot of time in jail are back out and they went back to doing what they know what to do, which is make crack. Where's cocaine come from? Well, it doesn't come from the United States. It comes from the Andean mountain region in South America, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, kind of in the valleys there in those mountains. That's really the only place in the world that it grows. I know they've tried to grow it in other places, but they're not very successful at it. Mainly shipped overland through Mexico and across our southern border, the same way that fentanyl comes in. Some shipments come through the Caribbean and maybe come into Miami or somewhere on the East Coast. But the vast majority comes right up through the southern border over the land. Methamphetamine, or ice, glass, crystal, crank, or shards. That on the right is ice. You can see why it's called ice. It looks like ice. It's a crystal. That's crystal meth or ice, one or the other, whatever you want to call it. That's what we see mostly here. We don't see the powder very much. Almost every seizure we've had in the last several months has been the shards like that. And we're getting it ounces at a time, by the way. Origin of illicit methamphetamine. That's also now made in Mexico. A lot of entrepreneurs down there. Okay, y'all can laugh at that. That was pretty funny. But serious problem here. But, you know, there were a few years ago, if you go back maybe 10 or 15 years ago, a lot of meth was being made here rurally. And with all these chemicals and these meth labs were blowing up and people were getting killed. And there is some of that going on now, but it's rare. Most of it's made in Mexico and shipped across the southern border. So I know you're all seeing a common pattern here. Everything that we have that's coming in this country is coming across that southern border. And I don't speak politics, I just speak facts. And that's where it's coming from. Some of the diverted drugs, remember I was telling you about those pills a minute ago? That's exactly what they look like. That may present itself. Somebody may say, I'm selling oxycodone, but the truth is, it's most likely fentanyl. It's not oxycodone. And a lot of our deaths, our overdoses, have happened taking one pill because they just don't know what the mixture is. And you would say, how's that possible? Don't people care more about themselves? Honestly, addicts really don't. If you've ever dealt with an addict, they really don't. They're just looking for that next high because that's the way their brain is wired. I would much rather see folks get help and get off the drugs and stay out of the jails. But that's not the reality that we have right now. There's a lot of folks that are trying to help those that are addicted. But that's why we're getting what we're getting on the desk, just because they don't care at the time. They're just looking for that next fix, unfortunately. You see a couple of street names there, Hillbilly Heroin, Kicker, OC. And then some of the other diverted drugs, fentanyl, which has legitimate use. It's used with cancer patients, I know. The fentanyl patches are. We've had people that steal the patches, and then they just chew on them to get the fentanyl out of them. Ketamine. Ketamine is basically an animal tranquilizer, more or less, but it gives a hallucinogenic effect, and so that's why people like that, drug users. And of course, gabapentin is basically an epilepsy medicine, but it also has a soothing effect. And so I think sometimes they use gabapentin to come down from some of the other drugs they've been taking. Now that's my quick brief on the drugs, and I was going to talk a little bit about my Secret Service and career with the Marshals. But anybody have any questions about our 26th Judicial District Drug Task Force or what we do? Yes, sir.
I thought there was heroin was pretty prevalent in this community. Is it not?
We don't see it very much. If it is, we're not seeing a lot of it. I see our seizures, every week, and I'm not saying I don't see any, but it's not a lot. It's not the lion's share. The lion's share is the coke, the fentanyl, and the ice. And I would say the two most is the fentanyl and the ice is what we're seeing more than anything right now. Yes, sir.
I saw where you enforce state and federal firearms.
Yes, sir.
What happens when there's a conflict between the two? They don't say the same thing. We're kind of in a difficult question about state firearms.
Yes, sir. So,
And then a corollary to that is, what about Texas defending their border and the federal government saying you can't defend your own border, even though they believe in Texas they have a constitutional right to do so? And I guess most people would say, gosh, seems like they would. But the federal government is saying, no, you can't defend your own. I mean, how is that going to work out?
well, the first thing, Mr. Kirkland, is the firearms laws. We work very closely with the district attorney's office, obviously, and we discuss every case that we work on. And this is one of the big changes that we've had that by forming the drug task force is that we have a direct pipeline to 2 prosecutors in Jody's office. And so we discuss our cases on the early end, because what we're learning and what we kind of knew already, if you do that, then you get really good prosecutions on the back end. So we would discuss if we had a conflict. We usually don't have conflicts on the firearms laws, not very often. We're going to go for where we get the most bang for the buck on that, and take the advice of the prosecutor on that. Now, the border region, that's a constitutional question, Mr. Kirkland. I don't have the answer on that one. And what do I think? Well, I'll tell you what I think. You need to build a border to keep folks out from coming over illegally. Come all you want legally, but illegally, we got to stop that. Because not, as we just talked about a minute ago with the drugs, there's a lot of other stuff coming across that border. It's not just people. It's stuff that's killing our population. It would seem common sense to me, yes, sir. Yeah, that's my opinion and does not represent the opinion of Jody. Well, thank you. But any other questions about the drug task force? Okay. Yes, sir.
Illicit versus illicit fentanyl, what would be the purpose of China manufacturing illicit?
We could dive deep on that one too, Russ. He wanted to know what would be the purpose of China putting illicit drugs into our community. Looks like sabotage to me, but who knows for sure, right? But that's where it comes from, and that is an absolute fact that the chemicals that make up fentanyl that go into Mexico and they're then put in bricks and shipped in the United States, that's all from China. Every bit of it. You can kind of come up with your own theories as to why, but I would say to destabilize our country, and I'd say it's probably done a fairly good job at it. Now, some communities are worse than others. I tell you what, you break the law in Jackson, Madison County, or Henderson County, or Chester County, your tail's probably going to jail. But it's not that way in every other community. People aren't being prosecuted in other communities. They're being prosecuted here, though. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Oh, yes, sir. I thank the DA's office for taking that stand and trying to make Jackson a better place, because we have to do that, or we're going to lose our community if we don't. So we talked about the Secret Service and the Marshal Service. When I first started here as a Jackson police officer, after playing football with Russ Ellis at Lambeth, Russ was one of the first people I saw when I came back to Jackson. I saw him in the Kroger out at University and Highland out there, and Russ says, "Remember that field goal?" And I'm like, "Man, it still lives. It still lives." No, but so anyway, so back here, after doing all those years with the federal government, which I'm very proud of and very blessed to have been able to do it. Didn't start out thinking that's the way it was going to go. Started out as a police officer. I love that job, working Jackson as a police officer. I absolutely love that job. The only reason I left and went to the highway patrol because it paid more money. And I don't think we can, this is not a political statement. I don't think we can pay our police officers enough money, to be honest with you, for what they're putting up with out there. So that's the reason I went to the highway patrol. I was real happy with that job. I happened to be working with a customs agent one day, and we were trying to get drugs off the interstate, and I had a dog back then for a few years, and a drug dog. And he goes, you know, you ought to try to go to work for the Secret Service. They're fixing to hire a bunch of agents. I said, hey, I'll never get hired in that job. I don't even know how that works. But anyway, I started thinking about it, and then I went over and looked at what it paid. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna see if I can put in for that job. So anyway, I put in for it. Very fortunate I get hired. I couldn't believe I got hired. But like I said, when you're on the outside, you don't know what the other side is, not really. And so I get hired. My son, my youngest son, Carson, who has developmental delay and epilepsy, he had started having some grand mal seizures between the time that I applied for the position and the time that I got it. So the first call I got, they said, you're hired with the Secret Service, but you'll have to move to Memphis. And I was like, well, I'm going to Vanderbilt every day with my son, or every week, to have his brain condition checked out, trying to figure out what these seizures are. And so I had to turn the job down. And then he said, hold on, let me call you back. The SAC of the Memphis office did. Steve Rutledge, I'll never forget it. He calls me back about an hour later. He goes, what if I say you can continue living in Jackson and come to work for Secret Service? I said, I'm in. I talked to the wife and I'm in. So anyway, that's how I ended up with the Secret Service. But I work Jackson. I continue to work the Jackson area because it's a part of the Memphis district for the Secret Service. And I did that for about 3 or 4 years. And then Washington, D.C. comes calling and said, hey, it's time for you to go do the president's full-time assignment or the vice president. And quite frankly, that really wasn't on my agenda with my son's health. I was actually looking to go as far away as I could from Washington. That wasn't the only reason, but that was one reason. And so I did. I ended up in Alaska because I could get there and there was an opening and it looked like a good family environment where I could continue to help my wife raise my youngest. And so that's how we ended up in Alaska. I did that for about 4 more years up there, so 8 years with the Secret Service, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So you're wondering, what does a Secret Service agent do in Alaska? Sometimes not much. Now, we had criminal investigations that we did. I worked credit card fraud, identity theft, computer crime, hacking of telephone networks. There were some weird things that I got into, but you just kind of migrate to where the cases are. But a lot of the time what I would do is like if the president comes to Alaska, I would be that person that's already there, that knew everybody already there. Even if it was just a stop over at Elmendorf Air Force Base, I was already there. Or if they come on vacation, which they did a lot. I had First Lady Laura Bush out there for a couple of weeks one time at Denali National Park. That was the best trip I ever went on. So then trying to keep her from getting eaten by bears, it was a very weird situation. We're climbing mountains and carrying shotguns, and I'm going to tell you, that shotgun gets heavy after a while. But I'm right behind her she's in a van as we're driving, coming onto the park, and we get about 10 miles in, and these grizzly bears come out of the woods, and they're up on the side. They're on the side of the van. I'm like, oh, this is not going to end well. But it did. It was safe. But you worry about everything. You're very paranoid when you're a Secret Service agent. They called it hypervigilance. I called it high blood pressure is what I called it. But so, we did a lot of things like that. I took the Carters fishing, President Carter and Mrs. Rosalind Carter, and had some quiet time with them. We did s'mores and stuff like that over a fire. We were on an island. There was nobody else out there. I was like, okay, you can halfway let your guard down out here. So we did that, and had a lot of fun times in that job in Alaska. And then, of course, I traveled from there all over the world. I remember I got a call one Thursday that said you need to be in Tanzania on Monday. And we were constantly getting our shots up to date, so I was like a pincushion all the time for Africa in case you had to go. So I go to Africa. I fly 24 hours to get there, and it was supposed to be a trip for the Treasury Secretary, where I was going to be the advance agent, where I was setting everything up for the visit. We were going on the Serengeti, going to meet the Maasai tribesmen. Man, I was all excited about that trip. Well, guess what? The trip got canceled. As soon as I got there, they said, don't unpack. I'm like, don't unpack? You gotta be kidding me. I flew 24 hours to get here. And said, don't unpack. So I didn't unpack. the next night we took off and left, and I went all the way back to Alaska from Africa. But we didn't waste the day. We went over to the island of Zanzibar and rented scooters over there for the day and just rode around. And then that's where I figured out Freddie Mercury from Coyne was from Zanzibar. I had no idea. There's a club there called Mercury's right in the middle of nowhere. You'd never, but anyway. But so I get back to Alaska, take a lot of trips from there, and Washington wants me to come back. You know, it's time to come to Washington now, and I'm like, still not ready to go. I asked my wife. I said, we're not ready to go anywhere like Washington, are we? Nope, we're not. So I talked to the U.S. Marshal there, who was Randy Johnson at the time. He was appointed by President Bush. And I said, you got any spots over there for a Secret Service agent who could just transfer over? He goes, just so happens we do. And I said, all right, I'm going to do it. I'm thinking I'm just going to move over there and become instantly U.S. Marshal, you know. Oh, no, I got to go back to the academy. And I'm 41 years old when I did that. I'm like, this place is not made for a 41-year-old. This is worse than Marine Corps basic training. I don't know if you know what the Marshal's training is. It's rough. And so anyway, I go back down there. I survived by the skin of my teeth back in Alaska. And the Marshals don't move you really unless you want to, unless you're trying to move up the ladder. So I end up over on the Fugitive Task Force, and basically for the next 15 years, mixed in with a 4-year assignment in western Arkansas in Fort Smith, I ran the Fugitive Task Force, where we'd go out and find folks wanted for some pretty heinous stuff. I kind of kept up with all my courses or my cases over the years, and I think we had about 1,000 captures when I was in the unit, and I think 250 of those roughly were for murder, and there was probably another 250 that were for somebody that shot somebody that just didn't die. But that was what our day was like every day. We get up in the morning, that's what we did, or we go to work at midnight, that's what we were doing. I finally got and said, hey, look, on Fridays, man, we need to take a break, you know. But it never failed. There was always a hot case that came out on Friday. And so then you're working the weekend. And I told my wife, I said, well, you are some kind of angel to put up with me the way that this job does me. But she was happy because I wasn't traveling all over the world anymore. I was just traveling in Alaska, which not a bad place to travel if you think about it. It's beautiful there. But yes, sir, Mr. Kirkland.
A lot of weapons training and self-defense.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I was a trainer for the U.S. Marshals for tactics, and we call them high-risk arrest tactics, which is, I called it how to not get killed. That's what I called the class. And when I would go and teach that class, that's how I taught it to the state and local officers too, is that here's a 4-hour class on how not to get killed. And so, you know, I was very proud of that, doing that. I was a firearms instructor for the Secret Service as well. So we spent a lot of times with firearms and things like that. But, you know, actually I don't really own that many firearms, though. I think I may own 3. That's about it. I've got some folks that I know, they probably own 100 or 200, but it was just never my thing. But anybody have any questions about anything? Secret Service? You want to know anything about any of the presidents or their spouses that I could tell you in here?
How about the movie or the TV series?
Okay. Yeah, we did a TV show. We actually did 3 TV shows. In 2009, we did one for A&E. And used to be you could buy it on History Channel, but I don't think it's there anymore. And it was called Iced, U.S. Marshals in Alaska. And then we did another one in 2012 called Alaska Marshals, where it was on Discovery Channel. And they wanted to do a whole bunch more shows. They wanted to order 15 and pay the Marshal Service money. They don't pay us anything, by the way. Deputy marshals and officers on those task forces don't make a dime off of that. But they had been with us for about 6 months to film the first show, the first 1-hour show, and you're wearing a microphone in the small of your back all the time, saying things sometimes you probably shouldn't say because you forget that you got the microphone on. But they were real good to us, and they would delete all that stuff out, thank goodness. But yeah, so we had a couple TV shows as well doing that. Everybody loved Alaska. I don't even think it was about the Marshals when they came up there. I think they were just on the we're going to make a show about Alaska kick. You know, all those shows are on TV now. But But anyway, I could go on and on. I didn't talk about 9/11 much. I got sent there when I was a Secret Service agent. I volunteered to go after the attacks, and I spent 3 weeks at Ground Zero. Actually, I spent a week and a half at Ground Zero and a week and a half at the landfill where everything that came from Ground Zero was taken. That was a rough. I'm very proud to have done that, but that was a rough 3 weeks, I'll tell you. We didn't find as many people as I thought we were going to. I think the weight of all those concrete and steel didn't leave much, honestly. But the difference between working at the Ground Zero location and then working at the landfill, the name of the landfill, that was another thing that stuck in my head, was called Fresh Keels Landfill. I'll never forget that, and I don't know how the heck they got that name, but it was already named that, obviously. But over at the landfill, anyway, we would go through things. Of course, we're wearing all these suits with oxygen masks and all that stuff because there was a lot of things in the air there that could kill you. There's a lot of asbestos in those towers. They were built in I think the 70s, maybe back in the 60s, maybe a little bit. But over at the landfill, we had rakes and shovels and picks going through just minutia, looking for anything that we could that would help identify somebody. Remember, it came from Ground Zero. It would go on a barge right there on near the West Side Highway of Manhattan. The barge would go across the river over to Staten Island, where Fresh Keels was located, and then it would come off that barge and it would go to a specific location. It was the largest crime scene in the world, but that's how they kept it together. It was marked off at Ground Zero and it was marked off at the landfill, and they made sure that whatever came from Ground Zero went to the same corresponding spot at the landfill. And we found driver's licenses, we found keys, wallets, anything that you would carry on your person. And some of those things were used to make identification. Some of the driver's licenses were. And then we would take that and put it in a container that was marked for such items. That's how we kept up with it. But like I said, not a lot of recovery of people. But we'll never forget that time. But have you any more questions about anything? It's been an honor to speak to you. Thank you.
The program you've been watching was made possible through the generous financial support of West Tennessee PBS viewers like you. Please visit westtnpbs.org and make a donation today so that we can continue to make local programs like this possible. Thank you.